Okay, good afternoon. This is the Oakland Police Commission Community Police Review Agencies Ad Hoc Committee. We are going to, I'm just going to get everybody's name for the record. We'll call the meeting to order officially. I'm Brenda Harbin Forte, Commissioner Brenda Harbin Forte. I'm chairing this ad hoc. And why don't we start with, I'm just going to go down the pictures that I can see. And Angela, will go with you then.
Present.
Yeah. All right, go ahead and give your name for the record, Angela.
Oh, Commissioner Jackson Castaigne, Angela Jackson Castaigne.
Okay, Carly, let's get you.
Good evening, Commissioner Carely Ordaz.
All right, Reggie, let's get you.
Reginald Lyles.
And Mika, let's get you. And give me your agency, Mika.
Mika Bell, CPRA.
Okay. Charlotte, let's get you.
Hi, Charlotte Jones, Acting Interim Executive Director for CPRA.
All right, and Katie, let's get you.
My name is Katie Dixon. I'm joining as a community member. I'm a member of All of Us or None.
Okay, and you're with ACLU, Northern Cal?
I do currently work for the ACLU, but you know they real strict on what you do with their name.
Okay, all right then. Okay, that's very good. You're here as a member of the community. That's good then. Okay, what we're going to do is today's agenda will be to continue with editing the document. And before we do that, as Charlotte, let me ask if you have anything, or have submitted anything that we need to take a look at before we get going. Were you able to get any of the flow charts or anything?
I was, let me apologize to the group. I thought that I would be submitting that all when I do the corrections, but I understand that I was supposed to have the flow charts today, and so I kind of at the last minute. So there's a flow chart for the intake process that I uploaded to the shared documents, and also a flow chart for the investigative process. I didn't get a chance to do for the discipline process. I apologize for that. But those two, they're just the outline. We're going to make them look better as it goes on. So it's the general flow chart of the processes.
Okay. So what I think I'd like to do is to go to the flow chart sort of again as an overview before we go back to editing the document.
Okay, Mika, can you do that for me there in the shared documents for the CPRA Ad Hoc?
And Mika, if you could share screen and everything, I'll just have you.
Yes, let me get to the folder first,
Okay.
and then I can definitely do that.
It's called intake process is one, and then the other one is called, I believe I named it final investigative process, or investigative process final. Or
Okay.
something.
All right. Okay, so we're gonna start with the intake one?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's loading. Let me download. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen with you all.
Great.
Okay. This is different than Teams. Go. Oh, here it is, share screen. Share. Okay, are you guys able to see it?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Let me see if I can. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Again, like I said, this is kind of a bare bones
Sure.
presentation, but so the intake process is basically that a complaint is either received at CPRA or received at IAD. If it's received, we have to have a CAR regardless. So if it's received at CPRA, it goes to IAD first for a CIR, which is a complaint investigation report. The definitions are in the SOP. So the CIR is received from IAD. The first step is that the CI3 reviews the CIR and assigns it to an intake tech. The intake tech summarizes the complainant statement. We don't base our investigations on what the CIR says alone. The intake tech has to listen to every statement and provide a summary of that statement, and then forward that summary to the CI3 for review. Based on that summary, the CI3 determines whether the complaint is mandated or not. Roll down a little bit for me, Mika. If the case is mandated, if the complaint is mandated, meaning it has an allegation, one of the 5 mandated allegations is considered a mandated case. And if it does not have one, it's considered a not mandated case. Either way, it's returned to the intake tech to update the database on whether it's been deemed mandated or not mandated. If it's mandated, oh, see, this is backwards, I'm sorry. Okay, that's backwards, and I'll fix that. So if it's not mandated, there's a notification of closure to the complainant. Ideally, we haven't actually had a chance to start that yet, but if it's not mandated, there's a notification of closure to the complainant, and then the CI3 will close it in the database. Under the other heading, if it is mandated, there's a notification of investigation to the complainant, as we discussed with the last meeting, that everyone should get notification. So we would update that to change, there will be notification at this point that there will be an investigation to the complaint. The intake tech will gather all the evidence, and they prepare what's called a summary intake form that has information regarding all of the evidence that they've gathered, as well as the complainant's summary statement, a summary of their statement rather. The CI3 will review that summary intake form and forward it for investigation. So that's the gist of the investigative process. Obviously, there's some nuances to it. For example, the complainant statement, if it hasn't been taken already, the intake tech would have to call to obtain the statement or do some follow-up if it's not clear. I didn't get into the specifics of what the evidence is. CAD reports, police reports, body-worn camera video. That's included all in the evidence. But that's the basic overview of the intake process.
Okay,
Obviously switching around those headings.
okay. And the other flow chart is?
The investigative process.
Mhm.
Mika can share that. While she's doing that, any questions on this flow chart of the intake process that I can maybe clarify?
Okay.
So it's called, it's either called final investigative process, Mika, or investigative process final. Something like that.
I found it. I'm just trying to download it so I could be able to zoom in. Or you guys can see it at full screen. Here it is.
Okay. Okay, so just an overview of the investigative process, obviously not with all the details, but the first part is that once it's past the intake process and sent for investigation, the CI3 will review it, assess that intake form. The process that we're starting now, which is not included in the SOP because it's something that I'm trying to implement now, is a triage process. So at this point, once the CI3 receives the summary intake form, they would forward it for investigative triage. And what that would mean is that the investigators assigned to the triage team or unit or part of the organization would review the cases to determine if it can be resolved with a summary investigation or a full investigation. Scroll it down a little bit for me, Mika. If it's assigned a summary investigation, there will be a review of the evidence. There's always a review of the evidence. Either investigation, summary or full investigation will require the investigators to do a review of the evidence. For a summary investigation, they will prepare an analysis of investigation, and then the investigator will be able to complete a short form ROI, which they already have in process. The summary investigation, the difference in the two is basically the summary investigation, the evidence, they're able to reach a definitive conclusion based on the evidence without interviewing the officers necessarily, meaning that the body-worn camera kind of answers the question. For example, if a citizen says that an officer pushed them, there is a triage and review of the body worn camera. And if the full encounter can be seen from beginning to end, from the time that the officers encounter the the community member to the end, and there is obviously clear definitive evidence that a push didn't occur, then that would constitute a summary investigation. There will be no need to interview the officers for that, and that could be resolved in a shorter format. If there's a review at the triage stage and that things aren't clear, or you don't get the video from the beginning to the end, or it's kind of convoluted or complicated or something that's more serious, it would go on for a full investigation, which would require interview of all involved officers and witness officers, along with the analysis of evidence and a long form ROI completion report. After the ROI has been completed, it goes to the CI3 who reviews the ROI for corrections or comments or additions to the report. Once they approve the report, it goes to the executive director for their review again and the finalization of the report. And the executive director is responsible for submitting the findings to IAD. Scroll down a little bit for me, Mika. Okay, so if there is concurrence on the findings as the charter requires, with the chief of police, if there's no sustained findings in SF, then the case is basically closed by the CI3. If there is concurrence, meaning that the chief agrees with the findings and those findings are sustained, then it moves on to the discipline process. If the IAD does not concur with the findings, the next step is a chief's meeting, where we both present our sides and how we made our determinations. If after that meeting there is no concurrence, the next step is the discipline committee by the commission, and they have the final decision. If after the chief's meeting there is concurrence, which is usually the process, we've only had, in my understanding, one discipline committee. So it's typical at the chief's meeting we come to some kind of concurrence. If there are no sustained findings, again, the case is closed. If there are sustained findings at that point, then it proceeds to the discipline process. And we would at this point have a flow chart of the discipline process. And again, I apologize, I don't have one available today.
Okay,
Questions on this investigative process? Okay.
okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from anyone? If not, I'm going to try to get my screen up, and so that I can get to get back into my mail so that I can open up. Sorry, trying to maneuver among all of these things here. Okay, I am going to open up and share my screen here. I can get here. Not yours. Let's see if we can get, I think that you are sharing screen still, Mika or Charlotte. Or Angela, can you turn it over to me to share screen?
You should be able to share. If you can't, I can share my screen as well.
Okay.
Or it looks like it's working. There you go.
Okay, that's it. Okay, we got it. Okay, let me try to get it bigger then. And Angela, we left out, we ended up at what section last time? Let me try to get. Where did we end up editing last time? I apologize.
I think we ended at section G, the complaint intake review, page 16.
Okay, and I am going to, I'm gonna use, I tested positive for COVID a couple of days ago, and I'm on Paxlovid, so I'm gonna blame everything on my COVID brain. And that's gonna be my excuse for at least the next week. Okay, so we're on we should be going to page 16. And we did B, the intake technician interviews.
The last thing I recall is us discussing contacting the complainants. I think we ended on that conversation with me explaining why I had differentiated between contacting them. So whatever page that is.
Do you have it, Angela? Am I getting to this? Says page 18, I think. That's where I'm on. So we should be at 16. What section again, Angela? This is all very
Charlotte, what were you referencing again?
Where did we leave off?
We ended up discussing the contact letters for all of the complainants.
What section?
I believe that's 18 down.
Go down.
Down to me, but. Remember, you were asking why should everyone get a letter, and I said I had
Right.
that, and
Right.
so that's, I know we were there at least.
Okay, and we have, so on this page, why can't I get it? Get the view. Let's see if I can get the view. 100%. It's 120% and get more. Okay. Okay, so then we've agreed that everybody will get each complainant would get a closure letter, correct? That's where we were before.
That each complainant will get a letter regardless. My input had been that each one would get a closure letter. So we agreed that each would get a letter. Yeah, either way, everyone would get a letter.
And with this little I down there, after this sentence, where after this part, again, each will get a closure letter. In the next section, there's a reference to within 10 business days, the intake technician will continue with the evidence gathering and documentation steps that are identified above. And when we say above, where above? What specifically? And I'm gonna just suggest that we not say identified above, but that we say specifically identified in section B2, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of the suggestions are just saying get rid of OPD/IAD. Did we ever come to consensus? You said sometimes it's OPD and sometimes it's IAD.
Yes, they're not always filed directly with IAD. Sometimes they're filed with OPD and then forwarded to IAD. But we can still just say IAD because when they come to us, they'll be from IAD, but that's not necessarily how they initiate it. So we can just say IAD. Okay,
so if the complaint was filed with IAD, we don't even necessarily need to do that. Well, if it's going to be, it's equivalent to being filed with IAD directly, even if it went to OPD first, because it's going to get to IAD. Okay.
This document is for the public, right?
I don't know if this, well, what I'm thinking is that maybe it should just say OPD. I think most people are familiar with just OPD in general, and they don't necessarily need to know that it's from IAD specifically, because I don't think the public really cares. They know that they filed a complaint with OPD regardless of if it was actually with OPD versus IAD. They don't need to know all that.
See, I think they do need to know. I think when we educating the public, we ought to say OPD or IAD. We need to let the folks know that they can use either source. Some people are afraid to go into the Oakland Police Department, and some folks think that's the only place you're supposed to go. So it's just a matter of a quarter of an inch a page, just say OPD or IAD.
Well, yeah, well, one of the things we were saying is they're never gonna go to IAD directly, are they? They're not gonna get to IAD. If they go, the only way they're gonna get to IAD is to go to OPD. So they can file a complaint with OPD. OPD will then send it on to IAD if necessary.
Then I misunderstood. I thought IAD does take public complaints, and they do not. That's what you're saying.
Well, let
I
me hear.
don't know, Commissioner, if
do.
they take them or not. They all
They
come
do?
to us from IAD. So I don't know if they were initiated from IAD or OPD, which is why I included both. I'm not sure.
See,
From us.
if IAD takes public, even one a year, if they take public complaints from the citizenry, it should say OPD or IAD. Just like you make a discrimination complaint or harassment or housing complaint, you can make it with the agency, you can make it with the state of California, you can make it with, 3 or 4 different agencies, and the public should know that.
Okay, and we can come back to that. One thing we were trying to do is to cut out some of it's OPD/IAD when it really is one unit.
Okay, say or. I understand you have that thing with the OPD/. I get that, but the issue is not semantics or grammar. The issue is we trying to educate the public through the document that you can make a complaint here or there, if that's possible.
Well,
And if that's true, then we ought to state that in with the goal of edifying and educating the public.
Right. So let me go back up in our discussion earlier here, where you talk about where people can file a complaint. Is IAD mentioned as one of the options for filing a complaint, or is it we said they could go to the Oakland Police Department and stuff, or to one of the we talked about them going to one of the what am I talking about, like substations or something like that. So when we first talk about where a complaint can be filed, let me go back to it. Complaint receipt and intake process. Maybe it's there. Complaints can be filed by the following methods. Complaints can be filed at the following locations. And it says any OPD precinct in the field office or inside CPRA. So this doesn't say you can file a complaint at IAD. It says you can file a complaint at an OPD precinct or headquarters in the field or whatever. So now, and then down here where we have, we have complaints made through CPRA or OPD, which is basically where we're telling them. So a complaint, as I understand it, again, several people will have to help me. So nobody's really filing a complaint with IAD.
Go ahead, Mika.
No, they can file a complaint with IAD. They actually have a phone number and they have a location. So if you're asking, should we add a line item here that says that they can file a complaint with IAD? We can. I mean, that's something that the public can do. And that's very different than filing a complaint with a sergeant or a supervisor, because they could speak to possibly a civilian that also works at IAD to file a complaint.
Okay, so then we should put in there then that they can file at IAD or with IAD.
Yeah.
From this discussion, it seems like we ought to have 3 there, because it seems from what you just read is CPRA or OPD or IAD. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's what she's saying, that it can be.
Then we
So
ought
if
to
we
have
look at-
all three there.
So it
Yeah,
says,
CPRA is there.
yeah, CPRA is there. So we said complaints can be filed at the following, well, these are physical locations. Let me move up a little bit. So up here where we say complaints can be filed against, then we got B, complaints can be filed by the following methods: orally or in writing, in person or by mail, by telephone, or by CPRA online complaint form. They can also file online with IAD.
I
No.
think the in-person or in the telephone covers that they can make a telephone call to IAD also. Because if I say that they can file them in writing or in person or by telephone to these locations. But I mean, she's right, we can just add IAD here.
And
It's
then
not, they wouldn't go to that location though. I'm not sure, but I don't think they go into IAD to make complaints.
so they can be,
They did pre-COVID, but I think this section is I just want to go back to this is internally. So internally, we know as employees where people can file a complaint. I think if we're trying to give information out to the public, that maybe that information should be somewhere else. Because otherwise, this section is going to get a lot longer than what it needs to be in terms of where people can file a complaint.
okay. And yes, Reggie, we discussed last time, there was a discussion as to whether or not this is really a public facing document or whether this is just for staff of CPRA to learn and know about the investigation process. It also needs to serve the purpose of educating the police commission about what CPRA is supposed to be doing and the process that CPRA follows. So, but CPRA basically says, because this is going to be relied on internally for case processing, some of the things that we might be concerned about for public consumption won't necessarily need to be included in this document.
Yeah, I just think philosophically that if a document even isn't public facing, if it's a public document, then it is for the intent of being precise and educating the public. The public is the principal people that we serve. And so they should know in the document where every place you can go. I think it's a conflict to me if you leave out locations. I don't know why we're doing it just to save space on a piece of paper that everybody's not going to read. Who cares if this document is 10 pages long or 15 pages long? Let's get it right. I mean, yeah. That's just my philosophy that and you guys can disagree that that we don't need to save space. Let's just get it right. If the public can come to 3 locations and they're IAB, CPRA, and OPD, then let's have it in the document. So there's no conflict if another document is out there that says all 3 places and we only say 2 places.
Okay. Okay, so under A, we would when we're talking about physical locations, no, those are not even all physical locations. We're talking about locations. We would add something in A. We got OPD precincts, we got in the field, we got inside the CPRA office, and we got through the CPRA online complaint process. Would we add something else there?
Yeah, I think we would just add IAD, and then we can just go back and specify what IAD does, how they accept their complaints, if that's what you guys prefer.
Okay.
So I think if you go online, you can fill out a form online, but It says that for the City of Oakland's website, that members of the public can file complaints related to police behavior 2 ways, directly with OPD or with CPRA. So I think we just need to leave it as CPRA and OPD to be consistent. And then it lists the 3 different physical locations. I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay,
But they don't call out IAD specifically, and maybe it's a thing where like CPRA receives complaints from IAD, but that's a subset of OPD. So I think OPD would be sufficient.
and let's put a pin in that then, and we'll come back so that we don't spend a lot of time right now. Once we get a fuller document too, Reggie will put a pin in it and see if we need to get to mention specifically IAD there, or if OPD is going to cover it by the generic OPD.
Right.
So we'll just put a pin in that and come back. And by the way, commissioners, if you or anyone else who has made comments or suggestions, please call those out as we go through that. I know, Angela, I see a note that should we list what types of complaints can be taken? I'm seeing a note on the screen here. Where was that? Or is it something that we've already covered from our last meeting?
I think we did. It was in reference to the 5 different mandated complaints.
Okay,
So it's where they can file, what can be filed,
okay, all right.
and how they're filed in that section. I know the 5 are spelled out later in the document, but it's a little buried.
Okay.
So I would just recommend adding a section for the,
Okay,
5 different types of complaints.
okay. All right, we'll try to get back to page 18 then. Mm, 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 mm. Okay, we're done with that little I above, identified above. You're going to specify where, what section. The next comment is down in the next paragraph, and what's A. Someone should send a closure letter. I think we have that. I think the note here, someone should send a closure letter. Everybody's going to get some kind of letter, so I think we've covered that generally. Carly, you had a question about what something means and where specific BWC.
Yes.
Mm,
Although I don't know now that I'm looking at it again if that was included in the definition.
okay,
It was, but it's body worn camera, but I believe that it's there. If it's not, I'll add it. I do think.
okay. And now the complaint investigations process. Cuddly, this other note based on, let's include the types of complaints that will be investigated. Where would we put that?
Well, that's a question for the body. We had a meeting earlier today, for those of you who were not part of that, to clarify the types of complaints that are investigated. And I think maybe Charlotte, you can do a better job at explaining what all this means, but I'm just trying to document what we said we were going to do. And maybe it's here, maybe it's in another section, but I do think we should have it here explicitly.
And specifically, the 3 commissioners met with Charlotte just to get some clarification on investigations and what things are being investigated. So it was just the 3 commissioners and the acting executive director, interim executive director. So we should let me ask Charlotte, anything that you want to add here? Is this where we should try to clarify and specify what complaints will actually be investigated? Whether they're mandated or not mandated?
I would definitely, under the complaint investigations process, I would like to review again to see the best place to put it, not necessarily in the investigation assignment, because we were discussing cases that would already still be assigned. It's just the allegations on that case, whether or not those allegations will be investigated. So that wouldn't necessarily change the A section, because those are the same cases that are being assigned, but definitely under this process.
Okay. And for the benefit of the other members, there are, as you've seen, there are some allegations that are mandated to be investigated. Other allegations may be included within the complaint, but they are not allegations that are mandated to be investigated. So there has to be a decision made at some point in terms of resources and just bodies and bandwidth, what to do with those cases where there's a mandated allegation, an allegation that mandates investigation, plus other allegations that where an investigation is not mandated. So I think we'll all need clarity on exactly what we should expect CPRA to investigate and to spend its time on. And then how we account for those cases along the way, for those excess or extra allegations along the way. Okay. When we come down to C here, the case management form, C1, will also indicate the dates that are 90, 150, 182, 2250, whatever, from the filing. Is it filing or is it receipt of the complaint with CPRA?
The filing of the complaint, because those are the dates that are used when they determine the 3304, and the dates that IAD has to use. It's based on when it was filed, even if there was a delay in getting the case to us from IAD.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so we can ignore that then. So we got, it is definitely the filing. Okay. Connolly, we have a question mark about the digital folder.
Yes, it is a digital folder. All of the folders are digital. I didn't specify on all of them because we don't have any paper folders that I know about, but I can, specify digital if you'd like.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, or if there's I assume there's the SharePoint site internal for, I assume whatever platform you all use, I would say a Google Drive, or just for clarity. And I did say add a link to it, but if this is a public document, maybe I wouldn't add a link so that the public doesn't have, any access to confidential information.
Well, no, they absolutely couldn't do that. And we don't even between investigators, they don't necessarily have access to each other's cases, only if they're sharing them intentionally for a purpose. So each individual investigator keeps their own digital folders for their files.
Okay. 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 There, someone added for approval there. Seems like a good addition. Okay. I think this was my setting out expectations. So we'll have parallelism. Reviewing the evidence, determining what you'll need, planning out the next steps, and setting out expectations. Yes. And that was my suggestion, to take out that language, one important part. That was, again, just to sort of.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. And then review the complainants and the RP's recorded statements instead of and or. Instead of an or, because you're gonna, if the complainant has recorded statement, you're gonna review it, and if the RP has recorded statement, you're gonna be reviewing. So these again were non-substantive suggestions here. So there could be, and then in one here, all reasonable efforts must be made to correctly identify each sworn employee, right? Or is it, or each subject sworn employee? If there could be more than one subject sworn employee, right?
True, yes, that is correct.
Okay. So again, these are non-substantive. I've tried to get rid of as many and ors. We got BWC, we know we're gonna do it, and it should be in all caps, so we'll know body one camera. And these coming up are non-substantive. And then there's communications with OPD, IAD, whether we, I think OPD and IAD are going to be interchangeable, or going to be one and the same for these purposes. You're going to be communicating with.
For this, you're correct. Their communication would typically, well, if there's a DLI, which is why I say this, the CI2 can contact the DLI. I guess that's not necessarily IAD, so that would be the OPD covering part.
Oh,
so
okay.
Specifically, it would need to say OPD.
Okay.
Or
okay.
IAD.
Okay then. All right. I think I had a question about this down here, the CII, where I highlighted. CII will prepare for interviews of primary and secondary / witness sworn employees. I'm not sure who that is or what that means.
I can use the same language. The primary is the subject officer or officers. And then the secondary / witness are the same, sworn employees, sworn invested employees.
I'm sorry, say it again now. So you're going to conduct interviews of primary
and
sworn employees and secondary or witness sworn employees?
I'm using here, and I guess I can take out secondary. I'm using secondary and witness interchangeably, really.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can just take out witness. You can just say witness.
So you can prepare for interviews of primary and witness sworn employees.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think she had some comments up there that I missed.
Oh yeah. Yes, thank you. Carly, catch me. You have a question, Carly, about how is this determined? Or is there training on conducting the interviews, or are there standard questions? Are there?
Yeah, I think that was answered in the section B, that the CI will utilize best practices. Yeah, so I was suggesting maybe adding that to the top so it's clear. Folks know that there is training, there are best practices, and you know, interviews are standardized, if that's what it is.
Okay.
To the top of this section?
Yeah, just moving it up so that we lead with that.
Okay.
And then I don't know whether the interview questions could be made available as an appendix. So I'm thinking, when I made my comments, I'm thinking if I'm an employee and I'm just joining the CPRA, what do I need to do my job? So I would want to see templates. I would want to see like best practices, right? But because it's also for the public, I don't know how much of that information can be available to the public. So I think that's just a balance that we'll need to have in this document.
The questions are, I understand. The questions aren't standardized though, except maybe the introduction. Other than that, the questions are definitely case-based and specific to what the allegation is about and who you're interviewing. So,
Okay. All right, great. And I see Tanetta Thompson has her hand up, and also Pastor Thompson has been with us for a while, as has Tanetta. So go ahead, Tanetta.
Yes, thank you all. Sorry, this is the last meeting. Going back to that question, how you raised, like if we can get samples of the question or, how it is. I think, what you can do also for a future employee is make maybe like a SOP, standard operating procedure within it. And then maybe if they ask, the public, because it is like how you just said, it is a case by case basis. So I don't know if that would be appropriate for the document to be in this type of document, because the interview is just the interview at that. So, and they're never going to be the same.
Okay. All right, good point. So, okay. So where are we ending up on this? The questions are case, we're going to have this language in. The questions are case specific, but should be aimed at determining. Are we going to keep that in and indicate just generally what they should be aimed at determining?
yes, I think we should leave that the same, but we will like move up to the top about the training that if you want this part B to the top.
Okay.
To start off, like the commissioner suggests, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Carly, please stop me along the way, or anybody who has any comments about anything. Carly, how is this determined that a follow-up interviews if necessary? So how is it determined, as Commissioner Adaz's question?
How is it determined if they need a follow-up interview? If they don't have sufficient information to conduct the investigation, sometimes some information isn't clear, the investigator, when they review it. And so they would determine then if it's necessary to follow up with them or not.
So in the analysis phase, after they analyze all of the information gathered, they may realize that they need more.
They should definitely realize that before the analysis stage. Yeah, if something is going on, if they got into the analysis stage and they haven't realized that they weren't clear on what the complainant had to say up front. But at any point, if they needed to, then of course they're not prohibited from doing that. But that's some information that they would know before they started writing.
Okay. And then here the CI will utilize the best practices interview taught by the CPRA or other training. And Cuddly, is that the one you say let's add to appendix? What should be?
That one's also tied to my previous comment, but if we're saying, it kind of depends. I don't think it's necessary to add as an appendix if this is best practices, interview techniques taught. Yeah, I don't know. What does the training look like? And do they need to be trained before interviewing?
Yes, they should be trained before conducting interviews. So the training would consist of, this is the first employee that I have, the new investigator. It is consists of her, right now she's sitting in on interviews today I think she did, with other investigators, more seasoned investigators, but also just a direct training on what you should say, training materials on how that should look, kind of questions you should ask, how not to be leading, things like that. More of a written and then a practical process.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if we need to be explicit about that, or if that's just assume that it happens before they start conducting interviews. So Charlotte, what do you think? Is it necessary for us to say, you know, that CIs need to attend trainings before being allowed to do interviews? Or is that just assume that that's the way it goes?
No, it's fine if you think we should be specific about it. It is definitely the way it goes. We wouldn't have anyone conducting interviews without being trained. So I guess, yes, it has been assumed that that's the case. But if you want it to be explicit, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, again, I think, you know, thinking as a new employee or someone from the public, you know, let's let them know that our staff are trained, you know, before actually conducting these interviews.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, we're doing oversight, and we're doing oversight of Oakland Police Department. And because of its history, I don't want to assume anything, you know, and the history dictates that we ought to say that the expectation is people are trained before they do any kind of critical interview with anyone around police malfeasance. We don't want to assume that.
Yeah. Good point.
But I will say at the same time, it's a valid assumption though, and it should be if you're hiring and these are basically, or is this like a city employee, you know, that they have met the minimum qualifications for the position and that they are being trained at this agency. You know, so I don't like, I feel like it's like how, you know, like a police officer has went to the police academy and has, you know, passed, post, you know, did all of that, you know.
No, a police officer or an attorney, it is mandated that they have to be trained in detailed outline what the post-training happens to be before they can be licensed as a police officer. So I think we ought to do likewise in this regard. We got to remember why we're here. We're only here not because OPD has done wonderful or even good in the last 25 years. We fought hard for this Measure LL for over 20 years because just the opposite. They had not done good. So I don't want to assume anything.
But if you're talking about if anybody is qualified to do an interview, you can,
yes.
I feel like, okay, so that's just like, so when I was working at the DA's office and when I was doing hearings and everything in trials, it was assumed because I passed the bar and I didn't have to put that, it wasn't in like any type of our, you know, manual, even at DPA right now, it's not in our manual. We have our own internal SOPs that determine what you do, you know, and how you move up and what is an interview, you know, in that process and what steps you take for the investigative process. But I don't know necessarily if it's really necessary to put that they will be trained, your investigator will be trained. I feel like that's more in-house with CPRA internally, as opposed to a forward-facing document, just like any job.
Well, again, you wouldn't be in the DA's office if you didn't pass the bar and have that training and take interviewing and probably law school and all of that. I don't know that that's been codified for someone, a police oversight, being a CI 1 or 2, or at least a 1. So they ought to be trained. They ought to be, we ought to say
sure,
they're trained, not just for our edification, but for the public's edification.
Can I add, there is a training section down here that specifically indicates what they'll be trained on. There's a training section at the bottom of it.
So I didn't get that far, but yeah. So, I mean, if there's going to be if there's already, you know, the training section, then I don't think it needs to be like they're going to be trained. They're going to be trained. I feel like that is, that could be like part of refer to the job description. You can put, maybe the job description code in the manual, and refer them to that, maybe make it a hyperlink, and that gives all the qualifications that you need for the position. That is just something, it just for ease of reading.
Okay.
Like, I don't necessarily know if that's going to be what that says to me,
Well, if we have it in further on in the document, the qualifications and the training that they have, then it's a moot point because you're saying what we're advocating for. That's what I'm advocating for.
Okay. And Charlotte, we do have it later on in the document.
We do have a training section in the document. It's not a qualification section, but it is the training.
The training section. Okay. Okay. Okay, anything else on this, Carly? You had some other comments. Have they all been addressed?
I believe, that has been addressed with our discussion here, so I'm fine with just referring to that in a different section, and I didn't get that far, so I apologize for not seeing that.
Okay.
And then the personal bias, I think that's one that I want to understand better, because as I think of it, how, it's really hard for people to catch their own biases. That's why they're biases. So this document says that, the CIs are responsible for correcting their own biases. So I'm not sure how that happens.
Yeah, I don't understand that either.
I think what I'm referring to is being mindful of it. I mean, you're right, we all have them, but when you recognize that that it can't affect what you're doing in this objective kind of position that we have, that's the best that you can do to correct that situation. You can't change it, but by addressing it and recognizing that might be a factor in what you're saying and trying to stop that, or that's what I'm referring to here.
Is implicit bias training one of the trainings that they get?
It's one of the trainings that you get as a new employee, just with the city. Not specifically, well, they haven't been specifically at CPRA. To be honest with you, there hasn't been much specific training that I'm.
But they'll get it. But they'll
get it. It's required by Oakland to get that training. Yes.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that folks should make note of what they don't know? Because I think bias, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. I was saying that we have to recognize that that's an issue, it's a factor for everyone. And when you're in an investigative position where you're required to be objective, if you can just note that I can't be biased, I want to keep that out of my head. Let's try to be as objective as I can. That's just kind of what I mean by being mindful of it. I don't think that anyone can just erase them. You can only be mindful of them and then try to not let them affect your decisions.
I wonder if
I think there's a better way to say it to like address that. That's just kind of the way that I said it.
Yeah.
So evaluate it and be mindful and observe for that. But that's what I mean.
Well, I'm curious to hear from other members of this committee. I think maybe the wording is sort of what I have trouble with, but I'm curious to hear from others in terms of what we should put there.
For me, I think what's coming to mind is more so conflict of interest. I know that we probably don't talk about that as much internally, but that's what's coming to mind. And then when we talk about our own personal bias, maybe we can, I haven't gotten to the training section, but that's probably where we could put that line in terms of being mindful and observing, our own personal bias, put that in the training section, not so much, maybe not up here, but we could put conflict of interest. That's the only thing I could think of for now.
Who does the
I
evaluating?
wrote in the chat, I'm sorry, Deacon, that
Go
the
ahead, go ahead.
CLI will be careful or will carefully evaluate the evidence for relevance and credibility while being mindful. Let me read it specifically. Being mindful of the role personal bias plays in evaluation. if we're wordsmithing.
But again, it goes back to the person being the judge of that. How can I be mindful of my bias if I don't know what my bias are? And maybe I'm too specific, but those were my thoughts.
No, I think the assumption is probably if the person has received implicit bias training, that there is an ability to do that, at least at a very basic level. If they're coming in, I think, Charlotte, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is what I heard, or at least the intent, that if they receive implicit bias training coming on as a city employee, then at a very basic level, based on the depth of that training, then you should at least be able to identify it.
Well, that's your attempt anyway. Yes, I agree.
Are they subject to evaluations?
They being the investigators?
Yes.
Yes.
Then I would indicate maybe another line of saying that CI1 will accept criticism about their potential personal biases. I think that's the only way you can discipline somebody, if they've been told that the way they think is biased thinking in some way or the other, and they've been corrected on it and told about it. If they continue to go on, that's the only way you can do any kind of form of disciplining them or writing them up in any technical way. So if they are evaluated on their biases, that they accept them and make an effort to correct. I have to agree, I don't think you can see your own biases.
I don't know that under the investigative analysis section, we would discuss employee evaluations as part of the investigative process.
Yeah, I don't think you can discuss the specifics of someone's evaluation, but you could say, don't you think that you have to be willing to accept the critique of your actions, your biased actions? That's all we want. We would just want them to correct themselves, and the correction has to come from someone else.
I think the challenge will be in determining how would you know if a person has evaluated based on their personal bias? How do you know that? How does an outside person gauge that?
I've evaluated people that worked for me that had biases that they didn't see, that I called out, talked to them about it, wrote it up, had a counseling session, held them accountable to the change. If they accepted the change and tried to change, we're fine. But if they didn't see it, could not see it, they could not continue without some kind of disciplinary action.
No, and I agree with that. I think I'm leaning more toward, is it Mika? Do I have that right? I don't want to say your name wrong.
No, that's correct. That's
okay,
correct.
Mika, who raised possibly going down the conflict of interest path and dealing with the bias path somewhere else, only because that is the challenge of having implicit bias, is that it's a conflict of interest in your ability to be able to objectively evaluate for relevance and credibility. Unless we can wordsmith how to add the critique piece here. But being mindful of the role that their own personal bias plays in their evaluation is the end of that sentence, Judge.
And I agree with the pastor and Mika. I just don't see how you can have this section, because it is a very slippery slope and they are being represented, I'm assuming, by a POA rep or some type of representative as they're entitled to. How you could try to get that without having any, independent sufficient evidence, which is why those type of bias claims are so hard to prove and rarely sustained because of that. So the ones that I've seen where they have had, where there have been like a bias sustained, or where we feel like we were going in the right track, is like, okay, maybe they're entering, they're stopping only, Black or brown people, in a specific neighborhood. And then they're entering like in the stop data, or when they have to do that, entering into CLETS, they're entering that it's like a white person. So they're taking away from the statistics for the number of people that they stop, because it looks like a bias, that they're only stopping Black or brown people. But again, that is like over like, you have to take like gauge that number, how are you going to go back? Like, let's say in a year, they made like 70 stops, or in 6 months, they made 70 stops. They've really 80% are Black people, but they've made it so that they fix the numbers. That's how you would prove bias. But I just don't think that it's really, you can't really ask that without, you can't tell somebody how they are feeling, or how they perceive other people, unless they're really open to it, like you said, like the deacon said. So I don't know if that's something that we want to go down. I mean, you could, but I think it is a slippery slope. It opens up a lot of possibilities.
I will say here, though, this isn't to me about, this is about personal observation. This isn't about like giving a directive that you would be disciplined for. It's about taking ownership of your own actions and the way that you view what you're doing necessarily. So it's not like, it's important that the investigator, try to be as objective as possible, but it's just not something that, well, I can see that you didn't follow, AI, so you're going to get written up for AI. That's why it's saying being mindful for yourself about your own biases and how you can correct them yourself, not that someone else, that I'm going to try to pay attention to whether you are or not in this situation.
So you're talking about from the investigators standpoint, you're saying that they need to be mindful of their own bias?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
okay.
What it says.
Oh, okay. Okay, because I kind of was reading.
Right.
Okay.
Ms. Charlotte, I have a question. Can CIs recuse themselves
From an investigation?
Or a particular, of a particular case? Yeah.
Yes, based on conflict of interest, if they know the person or they have a relationship or something of that nature, then yes, they would, if they self-identify a conflict of interest.
Okay. And then if they
not
have,
because
they
there was some bias. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that would be difficult to accept that they would have a bias. I think that they wouldn't be able to do the job correctly if they have a bias that they're admitting that they can't overcome for any particular case.
Okay.
Then how would you be an effective investigator?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Carly, go ahead.
Thank you all for the discussion. I wonder if maybe there's a better word than personal bias, or a better phrase. Maybe assumptions, that the CI needs to be mindful of and delineate their assumptions or what they don't know. But I think that when we include personal bias, I think it opens a door for us that we just have to, it's the slippery slope, as it was mentioned, and we just need to be mindful of that. So I'm curious if there's a better phrase that we can use to capture what you were envisioning, Charlotte, like assumptions or like unknowns, or I don't know, but another phrase.
I don't have a problem with that either. I don't know. I can't think of a better phrase right now, but I'm open for any suggestions, and I'll go back and review the tapes and we can insert that. But that's just kind of where I was coming from with that.
It just seems to me that your own personal biases, we all have them. And the only time my personal biases are going to give me a problem or create a problem if I'm not objective when I'm doing the interview. And if I can't recognize my own biases, it's up to my supervisor or whoever I answer to, by observation, reading my work, watching how I perform, to give me some kind of evaluation, counseling, or critique. So all I would want from my employee is to accept the counseling. If you don't recognize it and cannot recognize it because it's you, then you want to be able to accept when somebody says to you, you know, Reg, when you mention that, when you're talking to a female or whatever, you should say it like this. Use this word or that word, that it's better to be used at this particular time. And then be able to accept it as opposed to being obstinate or defiant. Obstinance and defiance is what gets us in trouble. Secondly, we got to take some risk. Yes, it's a slippery slope, but we want to err on the side of trying to be right, as opposed to being so careful that we have no effect upon folk at all. Lastly, because I have to go, this document is critically important because of what we've endured for the last 30 years. So that's what you got to keep in mind. I'll end there.
All right, thank you. Should we put a pin in this one as well? And we'll give this some more thought. We'll figure out whether we're going to use language about personal biases or anything, or conflicts of interest or assumptions or whatever.
Or presuppositions.
I'm sorry, or
presuppositions.
Okay.
But yes, I do think we probably could put a pin there and see perhaps what Ms. Charlotte comes up with based on this conversation and reviewing the notes in the playback.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Good. All right, so we'll go down next here. How do we have a note down here to add this to the appendix? Okay. And we have those references to certified training.
Yeah, I think that was related to my previous comments, but I think we've talked.
Okay. And by the way, if you have your hand up and I haven't seen it, feel free to just kind of chime in, because I don't have everybody's photo on the screen. Okay, then we're down to findings. Exonerated, unfounded, sustained, not sustained. No MOR, no jurisdiction, and not mandated, and no MOR being manual of rules. I suggest we add the definitions of these for ease. Okay, and see the glossary for definitions. Carterly, you're saying we need to put the definitions in the glossary?
Well, it looks like they are there already. I was just to avoid people going back to the, to the top, but I'm open. If you all agree, yes. If not, we can just reference them at the beginning of the document.
So we could do. I'm sorry.
I was going to say I don't have a problem putting them again.
So we could, so we'd say exonerated and define exonerated here. Unfounded and define unfounded there. But define all of them here. And is that what you're suggesting, Carly? And I think actually that would be a good idea.
Yes, thank you.
The findings are based on a preponderance of the evidence, standard of proof, and that is there's a footnote 10 down there somewhere. I'm not sure where the language is for footnote 10, and what I suggested we do that. We probably should put some definition of preponderance of the evidence in the text itself and not in a footnote. Okay. The next comment, this section down here, which is in 7, you start talking about the IRAC formula. My question was, every investigator gone to law school. And yeah, so IRAC is a term that law students and lawyers use. But I guess others do as well. But I don't know that we need to, I don't know. Anybody else's thoughts? You do put in A, B, C, and D what IRAC stands for.
Yes. Issues, rules, analysis, and conclusion. That's the A, B, C, and D.
So maybe we can ignore my comment here, since you're having to find anyone else. Okay. Anyone else? Any comments? I'm going to delete this so we can delete that comment. My comment there. Okay. Just some and or more and or stuff. This can be taught by CPRA.
Or you could also, just as an eye catcher, just bold those words.
In the IRAC.
And a formatting, a formatting issue, just so the eye will be drawn to it. So if IRAC stands for, you said issues, rules, analysis, and conclusion, then they could just make those particular words bold. That could be a note. So then that way it becomes obvious to the reader what you're referencing, even if they don't have to go back and look at a full definition.
Good point.
That's a good point. I made them capitalized, but you're right. I could have bolded them to make them stand out more.
We like bold, Miss Charlotte. We like contrast. Make it
very good. Good suggestion.
And I'll resist my italicize or italicize it. We'll resist that. Just bold should be
good. Okay.
I would just add, I'm not familiar with IRAC, so I think it would make sense just to say issues, rules, analysis, conclusions, and then put IRAC in parentheses. I think that would be easier for me to understand.
That's great. Good suggestion. You got that, sure. Charlotte and Mika, you're taking note of those. Okay.
And keep the ball still, Mika. We're keeping the ball for contract.
Yeah. Okay. And then down here again, the and or sometimes, we just don't, they can use best practices as taught by CPRA or a certified trainer. Doesn't have to be CPRA and a certified trainer. Okay. Unless you're requiring that it be both taught by CPRA and also reiterated by a certified trainer, and I don't think that you're requiring that. This one under discipline, my question was, will the proposed discipline be included in the report of investigation?
It is not. It's a separate document.
Okay.
It's the pre-discipline memo.
Okay. Okay. I highlighted these footnotes because I think some of the stuff that's in the footnote really should be in the text of the document itself. But where are we? We're at 7. Why don't we put a pin here? We'll start next time with D, investigation timeline and review. And Charlotte and Mika, if you would make a note that that's where we'll begin at the next meeting. It's 7:27, and we will it's almost 7:30, time for us to end. Our next meeting is scheduled for December 20. Obviously, we are not going to complete this document this year. We can stay on the 20th, or we could come back in January and start again. So I'm gonna sort of just talk with you all. I don't know what your schedule is. We knew we'd be pushing up against Christmas. So I mean, hear first from the two commissioners, what are your thoughts? While we'll get a little bit more progress on the 20th, I don't know what our attendance is going to be like. Are there any of you who are not available on the 20th anyway? Tanetta is not. Tanetta, you have your hand up. You will not be.
Yes, I will not be available.
If I can say I'll be available, that's not the issue, but I did want to include some additional procedures that I'm trying to develop that will be added to the SOP. And so maybe if we could push it, that would give you guys a chance to check the shared document and review those before we meet again. As I may not have them complete before the 20th. So, but in either case, that's up to you.
Angela, Carly, any thoughts? Just cancel the 20th and look at a time in January.
That works for me.
Okay. I'm not sure. So anybody have objection to canceling the meeting on the 20th? Okay. Tuesday the 3rd is not going to be good. We could do Tuesday the 10th.
I feel that pushes us out like 6 weeks.
I'm sorry.
I feel like that pushes us out like 6 weeks.
That pushes us out 6 weeks.
Yeah, can we do maybe next Tuesday?
Well, we would be meeting. Our next meeting would have been 2
The
weeks from
20th.
now on the 20th.
Do you think we could get through, like, I don't know if next Tuesday, the 13th is better of a date than the 20th? I know we won't have Miss Charlotte's new procedures, but we might be able to still make progress on the rest. I don't know, I'm just concerned that like, like if we don't do the 20th, then we can't do the 3rd, probably, like that would push us to January 10th, which is like 6 weeks from now.
The first
Yeah.
realistic date would be
And I kind
January
of don't
10th.
want us to, lose the momentum that we have.
I can make any time work. The 20th is fine for me. And if we wanted to do it next week, that's fine. I'll make it work as well.
I can too. I just wanted to just advise you that I had some more I was gonna add, so.
I cannot do the 13th. I can do the 20th if we are going to have to, if we're not going to complete this particular document for the new year anyway, then perhaps you might want to consider a poll with the other community folks and see what they can do and kind of make your determination from there. Depending on how many you think constitutes a good group for review, and then certainly ask them to review the document and make their notes and comments if they are not going to be able to attend. So at least whatever group gathers on whatever day, they can discuss those questions and comments and entertain those, make decisions, that the process is not hindered because people may or may not be present.
Okay. So we're going to leave the 20th on. And even if Charlotte doesn't have all of the suggestions or new things, we can save that for another time. We know that Tanetta won't be able to join us, but if we have anything additional, Tanetta, if you have any suggestions for the documents itself, maybe you can get into the shared document and put in some suggestions before the 20th. And then we will set our next meeting date on the 20th. But we will we'll keep it. I guess Katie has left already, and we'll see. Reggie is gone. Reggie said he had to go.
Yes,
So
Kate mentioned in the chat that her 3 o'clock meeting ended up being pushed back to 6:30. And so
Okay.
she left a bunch of comments in the chat, but she did, say she was leaving.
Okay, all right, great. Well, then let's keep our scheduled meeting on the 20th. And if we have too many absences, we can consider then, but we will otherwise just plan for it. Plan for the 20th as previously scheduled. Okay. Thank you all very, very much. I shall talk with you on the 20th.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy
Same to you.
holidays. All right. Okay.
Feel better, Ms. Brenda.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Angela, you're still there and everything. Okay, well, I will go ahead and sign out. Angela, thank you again so much for getting this
course.
done. Yep.
Talk to you
Okay.
soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.